I looked up from my computer screen only to find Susan, the executive assistant, standing in the doorway. Her expression was a mix of pity and curiosity, the kind of look you get when someone knows something you don't. "Chloe, Mr. Thompson wants to see you in his office," she said, her voice soft but carrying an unspoken weight. I nodded, quickly closing the files on my screen. "Thank you, Sue. I'll be there in a moment." Just as I was about to stand up, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "Asterisk, is it true what Kate is saying? Did they promote her instead of you?" Asterisk. I stared at the message, my mind racing. What could I say? That my own sister, who'd only been with the company for 6 months, had stolen the position I'd been working toward for years? That she had presented my ideas as her own in the meeting this morning? The walk to Mr. Thompson's office felt like a slow march through molasses, each step heavier than the last. I replayed the presentation I had painstakingly prepared just last week, the one I had poured so much effort into. And yet, it was my sister who was now getting all the credit. Kate had presented my proposal this morning as though it were hers, the words coming from her mouth like they were her own brilliant insights. I knocked on the door, trying to shake off the unease in my chest. "Come in," Mr. Thompson's voice rang out, smooth and confident. I opened the door to find Mr. Richard Thompson, the CEO of TechVision, sitting behind his sleek wooden desk. In his mid-50s, with his commanding presence and sharp business instincts, he looked every bit the powerful executive that he was. Everyone at the company respected him for what he had built, but beyond that, no one really knew much about his personal life. "Chloe, please have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat down, my gaze involuntarily drifting to the familiar file resting on his desk. It was my proposal, the very same one I had worked so hard on for months. "I wanted to talk to you about the reorganization of the department," he began, glancing at the file. "I know you were expecting the promotion. I couldn't hold it in any longer." The frustration, the confusion, the hurt, it all spilled out before I could stop myself. "Sir, those ideas Kate presented this morning, they're mine. I can prove it." Mr. Thompson paused, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "Understanding." "I know you know," I said. Mr. Thompson sighed, his expression unreadable. "I've been in this business for 30 years, he replied, his tone steady. "I can recognize talent and passion when I see it. Your proposal has your mark on every page." "Then why Kate?" I asked, my voice tinged with confusion. "Why promote her?" He looked down at the file in his hands for a moment before speaking. "The decision came from above. The board insisted on Kate. Apparently, she has important connections." A sickening realization swept over me. Of course. Kate's boyfriend, Logan, my ex-boyfriend, was the son of one of the board members. "I see," I said, standing up, my mind spinning. "Is that all, sir?" "No," Mr. Thompson said, rising from his chair as well. "I wanted to tell you not to give up. Sometimes things are not what they seem." There was something in his voice, an unspoken message, but I was too hurt to focus on it. I gave him a curt nod and walked out of his office, just in time to see Kate strutting down the hallway, proudly sporting her new director badge. "Oh, Chloe, did you hear the news?" she asked, feigning concern. My stomach churned. "Don't take it personally, little sis. Some of us are born to lead and others, well, we're meant to follow orders." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from my father. "Asterisk family dinner tonight. Your sister has an important announcement to make." Asterisk. Great. As if having my promotion snatched away wasn't enough, now I had to sit through a family dinner and pretend to be happy for her. What I didn't know was that this dinner would change our lives in ways I could never have imagined. The air in the house felt thick as I walked in. The smell of Kate's favorite stew filled the room, and I could tell Mom had prepared it on purpose, to celebrate Kate's promotion. "Chloe, I'm so glad you're here." Mom greeted me with a tight, nervous hug. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled away, and I couldn't help but notice the unease in her eyes. "Are you okay, Mom?" I asked, concern creeping into my voice. "Oh yes, of course," she said quickly, brushing it off with a forced smile. "It's just the excitement of the day." In the living room, Kate was already at the center of attention, lounging on the main sofa with Logan by her side. My ex. The same Logan who couldn't even pretend to look uncomfortable in the situation. Sister, Kate called out theatrically. Come. I want you to be the first to see this. She raised her left hand, and the massive diamond on her ring finger caught the light. Logan proposed this morning, right after my promotion, she said with a self-satisfied grin. Isn't today just perfect? I forced a smile, but I could see Dad sitting in his usual chair, watching me with a look of concern. Chloe, he said quietly. Congratulations, I said through clenched teeth, my voice tight as I tried to keep the bitterness from spilling out. Oh, and that's not all. Kate practically bounced in her seat, vibrating with excitement. Logan told me his father convinced Mr. Thompson to give me the position. Isn't it amazing how love opens doors? I felt my blood run cold. Logan's father. He had been the one pulling the strings all along. It was all so perfectly orchestrated, and I was the one left standing in the shadows. Before I could say anything, the doorbell rang. Expecting anyone else? I asked, my voice barely a whisper as my mind raced, trying to make sense of the tension thickening in the room. My mother's face went pale, her eyes wide with a kind of anxiety I had never seen before. I invited someone, she said softly, almost as though she were afraid to speak louder. It's important. Before I could press her further, the doorbell rang. My mother hesitated, taking a deep breath before walking toward the door. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as though she were preparing for something far beyond just a visitor. When she opened it, the floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. Standing in the doorway was none other than Richard Thompson. Meredith, he greeted my mother with a warmth that immediately confused me, his voice carrying an intimacy that felt out of place. It's been a long time, my mother murmured, her voice shaky, as though the very act of speaking to him was pulling her apart. She almost looked like she might faint. Kate, always quick to adjust to any situation, leaped up from the sofa, her voice filled with an exaggerated cheer. Richard! I didn't expect you to actually come, she said, her smile tight, eyes glinting with forced enthusiasm. What an honor! I didn't know you knew our family. But Mr. Thompson didn't acknowledge Kate's greeting. Instead, his gaze was fixed solely on me. Chloe, he said softly, his voice calm but laced with something deeper, something I couldn't quite place. I think we have a lot to talk about. My heart skipped a beat. What's going on? I demanded, turning to look at my mother, the woman who had always been my rock, the woman I thought I knew completely. Her eyes filled with tears, and without warning she began to sob, her body shaking as guilt seemed to pour from her in waves. I'm so sorry, my love, she cried, her voice thick with remorse. I should have told you years ago. Told me what? My throat tightened as a lump formed, and it felt like the walls of the room were closing in on me. Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his expression firm, unyielding. I'm your biological father. The silence that followed was deafening. What? Kate's voice broke the stillness, sharp and piercing, her disbelief cutting through the air like a knife. The man I had always known as my father, the one who had raised me, who had been the one constant in my life, slowly stood up from his chair. His face was filled with sorrow, and his voice trembled as he spoke. It's true. Your mother and I, we wanted to tell you so many times, but the timing never felt right. The world around me seemed to tilt, to shift beneath me. The strange, unexplained interest Mr. Thompson had taken in my career. The way he'd watched me so closely. The cryptic comments he'd made. All of it clicked into place with brutal clarity. Kate's face drained of color, and her expression twisted as she tried to process what she had just heard. The person whose position I stole is the CEO's daughter, she whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling with the weight of the realization. Logan, always the joker, laughed nervously. This must be a joke, he said, but his voice was too strained to carry any real humor. It's not, Mr. Thompson said, his tone turning cold as he directed his gaze toward Kate. And we need to have a serious conversation about that promotion. With a swift motion, he pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, the crisp paper crackling in his hands as he laid it on the table in front of me. But first, Chloe, he continued, his gaze softening slightly as he turned back to me, there's something you need to see. Something I've been waiting to share with you for years. No. My mother stepped forward, her voice unsteady, her eyes filled with panic. Richard, please. It's time. Time for what? My heart hammered in my chest as I stood frozen in place, barely able to get the words out. Meredith, Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady but firm, our daughter deserves to know the truth. And with that, he opened the envelope. His hand shook slightly as he revealed the contents. Tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to choke on as I slowly unfolded the papers inside. There were 2 documents. The first was an original birth certificate, and the second, a legal contract dated the very day I was born. What is this? I asked, though the weight of the contract in my hands was already beginning to make a cruel kind of sense in my mind. When your mother told me she was pregnant, Mr. Thompson began, his voice tinged with regret, I had just founded Tech Vision. We were young and your mother was already married. I was risking everything to build the company. But I loved her and I wanted to be there for you both. My mother sobbed softly in the background, and the man I had known as my father, my real father, reached out, his arms enveloping her with quiet comfort. The grief in his eyes mirrored my own, and I could feel my world unraveling, thread by thread. Your mother and Charles were the perfect couple, Mr. Thompson continued, his voice growing heavier. He had trouble having children, and she asked me to stay away so that I wouldn't destroy her family. But I set a condition. I looked back at the contract, my mind struggling to make sense of the words. The details blurred, but a few phrases stood out, and they hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a trust fund. Set up for me. For my benefit. 30% of Tech Vision. Shares placed in my name the day I was born. I put them in your name the day you were born, Mr. Thompson explained, his voice steady despite the gravity of the revelation. Under the custody of a trust that would activate when you turned 30 or when the truth finally came to light. I reread the document, my eyes scanning the words, the meaning sinking in with agonizing clarity. Kate, who had been eerily quiet up until now, suddenly exploded. This is ridiculous. Are you telling me that my insignificant sister owns 30% of Tech Vision? Her voice cracked with anger, her face a shade of red I had never seen before. But Mr. Thompson didn't flinch. His response was measured, cold. With the shares I've accumulated over the years, he said, his gaze shifting from me to Kate, Chloe now controls 51% of the company. She is the majority shareholder. Logan jumped to his feet, his face turning pale. You can't be serious. Mr. Thompson didn't waste a moment. The board? The board answers to the shareholders. Then, with a smirk, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Alberto? Yes. Execute the protocol we discussed. Yes, now. He looked back at Kate, his expression unreadable. Your promotion has just been revoked, he said, his voice calm and final. Kate's face twisted with rage. You can't do that. Actually, I said, finding my voice at last, we can. And the saddest part? I don't even need this power to prove my worth. My work speaks for itself. My mother stepped forward, her face a portrait of regret. Chloe, I'm so sorry. We just wanted to protect you. Protect me? I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. Or protect yourselves. Both, replied my adopted father, the man who had raised me with love and care. But mainly you. We knew that if the truth came out too soon, people would doubt your accomplishments. We wanted you to build your own path, just like you've done. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. I've watched your career from afar. Every promotion. Every successful project. You did it all on your own. Kate, still seething, stood up abruptly and grabbed her purse. This isn't over. Let's go, Logan. But Logan didn't move. He just stood there, caught in the web of a truth neither of them had expected. Kate, I think we should. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. My father warned me about this, he admitted. He told me it was wrong to steal Chloe's job. But I didn't listen. I didn't think it would blow up like this. Kate looked at him, disbelief written all over her face. This isn't your problem. And with that, she stormed out, her anger echoing in every step. The door slammed behind her. And the silence that followed felt heavy. Too heavy to bear. Then, just as I thought the moment might stretch on forever, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was an email from Human Resources. Dear Chloe Gilbert, This is to officially notify you of your appointment as Chief Operations Officer at TechVision, effective immediately. The words hit me like a wave, and I felt a rush of emotions I hadn't prepared for. Mr. Thompson watched me, his eyes softening with a mixture of pride and something else. "It's the position you deserved from the start," he said with a small approving smile. "Although, technically, you could have my position now if you wanted." I didn't smile back. I couldn't. Instead, I looked him square in the eyes. "I want to earn that position," I said, my voice firm. "Just like I've earned everything else in my career." Months passed. Transition wasn't easy. The office buzzed with rumors about my true identity. The whispers, the sideways glances, the hushed conversations in the break room. All of it felt suffocating. But as hard as it was, I let my work speak for itself. Actions are louder than words. And now? Now was no different. I let my achievements, my dedication, and my commitment to the company silence the doubts. Kate did eventually apologize. But it wasn't the heartfelt apology I had hoped for. It felt more like a reluctant gesture, a resignation forced by the pressures of family rather than any true remorse. She left TechVision and moved on to another job. One where she would have to start over. Just as I had done years ago. Her departure wasn't as satisfying as I had imagined. There were no dramatic goodbyes. No grand statements. Just a quiet exit from the place that had once been her battleground. As for my parents, the two men who had played such pivotal roles in my life, they began the slow, sometimes painful process of rebuilding our family dynamic. Thompson, despite the mistakes of his past, turned out to be a dedicated father. He was eager, even desperate, to make up for the years he'd lost. And although it wasn't always easy, I could see his effort. He was trying. And for the first time, I believed he could be the father I had always hoped he would be. Then there was the man I had always called Dad. The one who had been there for me when Thompson couldn't or wouldn't. He remained my constant, my rock. And in that I found comfort. But my mother? Her journey was different. It took her longer to forgive herself than it had ever taken me to forgive her. I could see it in her eyes. The constant battle she fought with herself. The weight of years spent trying to protect me from the truth. One night, as she sat beside me, tears quietly streaming down her face, she whispered, "Do you know why I chose the name Chloe?" Her voice cracked with vulnerability. "It means the chosen one. Because despite all the pain and the secrets, you've been a blessing to all of us." And in that moment, I finally understood. Her choices, her sacrifices, her love. And for the first time, I forgave her. Today, as I sit in my new office, gazing out the window at the skyline, I reflect on the journey. Family secrets are like ticking time bombs, buried under layers of silence until they can no longer be ignored. But sometimes, when the truth finally emerges, it doesn't destroy everything. Clears the path for something new, something better, a fresh start. To anyone out there struggling with their own battles, whether in their career, their family, or their sense of self, remember this. Your worth isn't tied to your last name or the mistakes of others. It's in your work, your integrity, and your ability to rise when the world tries to tear you down. You are the architect of your own future, and no one, not even your past, can take that away from you. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, like the video and subscribe to our channel. This is Revenge Scales, where justice always finds its way. See you next time.